The map of lies. If you look at a map of the Middle East today, you will notice perfectly straight lines separating nations, like Syria and Jordan or Iraq and Saudi Arabia, which rarely exist in nature, where borders are formed by mountains and rivers. But here they were drawn with a ruler, by men who never set foot in the lands they were dividing. This is the story of the greatest betrayal in the modern Middle East, a secret deal signed during World War I that promised freedom to the Arabs, while simultaneously selling them into colonial servitude, creating a geopolitical disaster that is still burning today. To understand this lie, we go back to 1915, when the British Empire was locked in a stalemate with the Ottoman Empire, and devised a strategy to destroy the Turks from within by inciting an Arab revolt. The British High Commissioner in Egypt, Sir Henry McMahon, began a secret correspondence with Hussein bin Ali the Sharif of Mecca, promising that if the Arabs fought against the Turks, Britain would support a massive independent Arab kingdom stretching from Aleppo to Aden. Hussein believed this word and fired the shot that started the Great Arab Revolt, sending his Bedouin armies, led by his sons and the legendary British officer T. Lawrence, to fight a brutal guerrilla war in the desert, sacrificing thousands of lives for their future nation. But while the Arabs bled in the desert fighting for a promise, the British government was already breaking it in a smoky room in Downing Street, where a British diplomat named Mark Sykes met with a French diplomat named François-Georges Picot to decide the real future of the region. Sykes viewed the Middle East as a chessboard, and Picot was determined to secure French dominance. So these two men, representing the greatest empires on earth, pulled out a map and drew a line across it from Acre to Kirkuk, deciding that everything north, including Syria and Lebanon, belonged to France, and everything south, including Iraq and Jordan, belonged to Britain. They carved up cities that had traded together for centuries, separating families and tribes with ink on paper, ignoring all ethnic and religious realities on the ground. They invented countries that never existed, lumping Kurds, Sunnis, and Shias into a single state called Iraq, simply because it suited British oil interests, and agreed that Palestine would be under international administration, planting the seeds for a century of conflict. This secret treaty, known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, was signed in May 1916, at the very moment T. Lawrence was assuring Arab leaders that Britain had no territorial ambitions. It was a lie of breathtaking proportions that remained secret until the Russian Revolution of 1917, when the Bolsheviks seized power and discovered the treaty in the Tsar's archives, publishing it to the world. The Arabs were stunned to discover their future kingdom had already been partitioned and sold off like cattle, while Lawrence was devastated by the guilt of leading men to their deaths for fraud. When the war ended and the peace conference convened in Paris, the Arab delegation, led by Prince Faisal, arrived expecting to be welcomed as allies, but were treated as subjects despite Faisal warning that artificial borders would lead to eternal war. The European powers were deaf to his appeals and proceeded to implement the map almost exactly as drawn, marching the French army into Damascus to expel Faisal and using British air power to suppress rebellions in the new invention of Iraq. The lines they drew became cages, trapping the people of the Middle East, forcing rival sects to live together in unstable states, while separating unified peoples, like the Kurds, between 4 different countries. The logic of the map was not for the people, but for pipelines designed to extract resources to Europe rather than build stability in Asia. The consequences metastasized into the conflicts we see today, as the sectarian violence in Iraq is a direct result of forcing distinct groups into a single political entity they did not choose. For decades, these artificial states were held together only by brutal dictators, like Saddam Hussein or the Assad family, who used repression to suppress the internal contradictions built into their nations. The moment these dictators weakened, the borders began to dissolve, and old loyalties reasserted themselves, most vividly demonstrated in 2014, when ISIS bulldozed the earth berms between Iraq and Syria, declaring the end of Sykes-Picot. While the world was horrified by ISIS, many in the region understood the symbolism of destroying a border they viewed as a colonial prison wall. The chaos in Lebanon, the fragmentation of Syria, the struggle for Kurdish independence, and the wars in Iraq are all aftershocks of the earthquake, triggered by 2 men in a London drawing room. The agreement also laid the groundwork for instability in Palestine by creating a contradictory promise that Britain could never keep, eventually exploding into a conflict unresolved to this day. The tragedy is that it was a display of hubris, where diplomats believed they could redesign a civilization they did not understand, treating people as passive subjects rather than human beings. Had the promise to Sharif Hussein been kept, a unified Arab state might have emerged, managing its own diversity and using oil wealth for development rather than conflict, but instead the region was fractured into weak, competing states, easy for foreign powers to manipulate. The oil beneath the sands became a curse fueling coups and invasions as the West fought to control the energy powering their economies. The British and French empires eventually retreated, but the lines they drew remained ghost borders, haunting the lives of millions every time a checkpoint stops a family or a drone strikes a convoy. The story of Sykes-Picot is the ultimate lesson in the danger of secret diplomacy, teaching us that you cannot build peace on a foundation of lies, and that maps drawn by empires are rarely maps of peace. The straight lines in the sand are scars proving that the ink of a diplomat can be as deadly as the bullet of a soldier. Today, as the Middle East struggles, with its identity the shadow of Sykes and Picot still looms large, reminding us that history is not just the past, but the architecture of the present. The betrayal of the Arabs remains an open wound, a testament to the cynical reality that in the game of nations the weak are sacrificed for the ambitions of the strong, leaving behind a legacy of chaos that may take another century to heal. The map of the Middle East is a crime scene, and the fingerprints of the West are all over it.